Okay, so far we've done some styling, we've done colors and margins and some padding and stuff and width and height. But a really common thing we run into is how to put divs in columns and in grids and beside each other. And this has been tackled a lot of different ways over the years. By default, the divs are always stacked on top of each other. We can see that again if we look at our inspector while looking at our little example page. So if I go over this and we hover over this div, it's just one rectangle, and then we have another div here, and these divs are all on top of each other. The zero, the plus minus, the equals, they're all one on top of one another. None of them are beside each other. So how to get them beside each other has been this long thing that there's lots of ways to do it. I'm going to go over briefly one of the more modern ways to do it, which is called CSS grid. But you should be aware when you search for this online, as you're trying to figure out, like, how do I make a grid? How do I do this? You're going to find a lot of different answers depending on the year that the answer is from. There used to be this thing called Flexbox, which still I use a lot and a lot of people use. Way back, there was this thing called floating, where we'd float elements around and position them, and that's gone way out of fashion. But CSS grid is kind of the big way that people do that today. So we're just going to throw a little bit of code in there just to see it work, so you have some direction on where to go with this. But we're not going to go over it in detail because it's a bit hefty and a bit advanced. So let's do a little bit of CSS grid. So we have a kind of good example here, which is these elements, these plus minus and the equals and the C. So we have all these operations buttons here, and let's say we want to move them up so they're beside our number buttons. So we know we could sort of do this. We could put like a plus button at the end of the 9, we could put a minus button at the end of the 6, and then so on, and they'd start moving over there. But then we've kind of disorganized our code a little, and now the plus is beside the 9, when really we want to keep all those operation buttons together. Now, we don't have to do it this way. We could do it many ways, but this is partly for the reason of showing you how it works, right? So we have basically these different divs. We have, we're going to move this 0 button because it kind of belongs in this group of the numbers, and we're going to say class equals number buttons. And then here we're going to say class equals, actually we're going to make another container around this and say class equals operations buttons. And you can see how classes also help us divide up the HTML. So it's not just a div after div after div, and it like you can't even keep your brain together because there's so many divs. We can see, okay, I have a group called number buttons and I have a group called operations buttons. We save it, everything looks the same. All we did was encase them in more rectangles. But we want to put this operations button beside the number button. So how do we use CSS grid for this? Well, there's basically a couple CSS properties that we can use for this. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap the whole thing in another div. So on top of this, we're going to give it div class equals main grid. And we're going to wrap all of this in that big main div. Okay, so this is a really common thing that you see when it comes to dealing with HTML and CSS, is you just keep adding more divs, and they're wrapping around each other, and they all have these names, and that's how we style them all up. It gets pretty wacky, which is why when we go to that Google site and you inspect it, it's got so many divs. They're nested. Div, 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 div. Yeah, that's because that's what ends up happening once you get way into the complicated types of styling that are out there. Now, we're going to try to keep it simple, but we can't avoid some of this. So with our main grid, we're going to go ahead and apply some of these styles. So what we're going to do is we're going to say display grid. That's the first thing we're going to do. Now, when I save that, nothing changed because it doesn't know the specifics of how we want to display the grid. So what we're going to do is we're going to enter in this little property, which is pretty cool, which is called grid template columns. Grid template columns. And we're going to give it some weird looking units, which is 1FR, 1FR. We're going to save that. Now we can see it split it up into 2 columns, and those 2 columns are equal. So the FR, I think it stands for fraction, and basically what you're telling it with this second thing here is you're telling it, oh, give the first one half, like 1/2 of the fraction, and give the second one 1 a half of the fraction as well. If we make the first one 2FR and the second one 1FR, this one will get 2/3 of it, and the second one will get 1/3 of it. So if we save that, we see that this gets moved over. So this is a little bit how grid works. There are a lot of caveats. There's things you can do to make space between the grids and make all kinds of details here, but that's a really rough look at how you can space out these things beside each other. So, okay, armed with this knowledge that we have now, with some of the background and text color, and we can kind of lay things out in a bit of a grid layout. We've got padding, we've got background. I want you, if you're feeling comfortable enough, if you're enjoying it, to maybe try to make this calculator look a little bit nice. Maybe try changing the colors to something you like. Maybe try looking up how to make rounder borders so that the buttons aren't totally square looking, but they have that kind of rounded edge like we see in the calculator from Google. If we go here, we see they have this kind of rounded edge. How do we get that? If you want to try Googling that. Try laying this out a little bit. In the next video, we're going to go over that together. I'm going to lay things out a bit in a way that I think looks nice. You'll get to see my process for sort of touching this up, moving stuff around, trying to get it laid out, and how to make this text input look kind of nice in a way that I like. But ultimately, CSS is going to be all about expressing yourself. It really is a kind of artistic thing, much more than HTML, which is really just about information. But CSS is creative. So try getting in there, try playing around with some stuff. Maybe the quizzes will help you a little with getting your creative juices going. And we'll see you in the next video where we'll do some more of this together.